Hello, Chess.com listeners. This is International Master Mark Ginsburg coming to you with the third and final installment on the Keres attack, which has received renewed interest in recent games. In the first two installments, we looked at some solid ways to play for black, such as the knight c6 defense. Let's take a look. We reach the Keres attack via several different ways. Black can play d6 now, or e6. It can transpose. Let's say he plays d6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3, e6, the Scheveningen. And now g4 defines the Keres attack. And it's the eternal debate. Is this move weakening or not weakening? Black has to play fast because white intends a rather primitive pawn storm on the king side. So in all the defenses we're suggesting, black has to play in a very directed manner. The first installment saw black playing knight c6 to try to trade a pair of knights, with interesting complications. The second installment saw the immediate reaction e5, which is also viable, but leaves white with some interesting options, such as bishop b5 check in this exact position, which may be white's best move. In our final installment, we're going to be looking at another possibility in the Keres attack. Let's go back to the Keres attack here. Knight f6, knight c3, e6, g4. Now we're going to follow a game from Tukayev was white, Adam Tukayev, who's rated 2537, and Liviu Dieter Nispianu, a Romanian grandmaster, who's rated 2647. He actually has played in world championship matches. In FIDE elimination matches, he's advanced quite far. So he's very dangerous and well prepared theoretically. In this position, Nispianu starts with the move h6 to hold white up a little bit on the king side before declaring his intentions. Tukayev played the theoretically recognized move h4. And in this position, this has been seen since the 80s quite a bit. And people used to play d5. However, that move doesn't score very well theoretically because what usually happens is that white can throw in the bishop check at some point, inconveniencing black, and black winds up with an isolated pawn on d5. So we're not going to play the move d5 in this exact position, although black may be able to have a narrow path to equality. It's not a lot of fun. A lot more fun for black is what Nispianu played. He played the e5 idea now in this deferred way. It's very clever because black is gaining control of some important dark squares while simultaneously giving up some light squares. However, what he wants to prove is that white may wind up weak on those very same light squares as occurs in the game. At this point, white has to play knight f5 to cover the g4 pawn attack. Now black just develops the bishop, and the soundness of this approach is proven by the fact that chess engines are liking black already. In other words, white has no convincing follow-up in this exact position to reach an advantage. Actually, Nispianu, instead of bishop e6, which is completely possible, he deferred that for one move. Nispianu played knight c6 first. And let's start with this position. Knight c6, eyes d4, and the white knight looks menacing out on f5, but it's sort of just hanging out there for the time being. The first question is, what would happen if white engineers a pawn storm with f4? The answer is, as you might have guessed, is that f4 is not very good. The move does not develop, and black can just continue developing his own pieces with bishop e6, and white has no particular follow-up. The problem is if he continues with g5, takes, there's an h-file pin going on, and white cannot take back with a desirable h-pawn. In this exact position, he'd have to take back with the f-pawn, and then we have an unpleasant situation for white after the blow knight takes e4, which you should always be aware of in these lines. To regain the pawn, white has to give up his knight with knight g7, and after takes, knight takes, white's attacking e6, but as you may have guessed, black can liberate the backward pawn with d5, and he's way ahead in development, and white can't put his knight on c5 because of the queen check. and that would win the knight. Therefore, in this position, he'd have to crawl back with something like knight f2, and white has a terrible game after e4. Black has a massive center, and white is completely undeveloped. For example, c3, queen a5, and white's running out of moves. For example, if he continues pawn storming, black could do a number of things. He could even sacrifice a pawn with e3, and after takes d4, things are happening too fast for white. It's completely bad. Bishop d2, takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, and white's king is wide open, and black's rooks are going to join in the attack, and white is completely lost. Let's go back. That was a completely bad variation for white. This move f4, attacking too soon. So the move f4 actually does nothing due to the h-file pin and would just be a bad move. Tukayev played a superior move, bishop c4, trying to stay on the light squares, and Nispianu played bishop e6, neutralizing the diagonal. After bishop to b3, Nispianu just reinforced the attack x-ray on g4 with queen d7, which renews the ideas of g6. At this point, if white went ahead with g5, black can react with the standard blow knight e4. White has nothing better than to regain the pawn with knight g7, and after black takes and white takes, white is eyeing the d6 pawn, and if black were to move forward, white could consider moving the knight to c5. However, black can simply castle, and this guards the backward pawn, and the backward pawn is threatening to move. And furthermore, white's king is way open and he's underdeveloped. He definitely doesn't want this situation. So the move g5, if we go back a little bit, the move g5 is grossly mistimed due to that simple tactical blow. Tukayev didn't play g5 in this position. He played the move queen f3. Now after queen f3, Nispianu took this moment to clarify with the move h5. This is a nice move because it puts Tukayev to the test. If Tukayev at this point were to play g5, as you might have guessed, Nispianu again has knight e4, exploiting the tactical features of the position. For example, white regains the pawn knight g7 as we're used to seeing, bishop takes, knight takes, and now it looks optically like maybe white has a decent position, but it's not true. Black can jump in with the knight, hitting the queen. Let's say white made a counter check with his knight. Black can simply remove the offending piece. White has to get his queen out of attack and takes back. And at this point, black just defends the rook with rook g8. It looks like the queen is menacing on f6, preventing long castle, but in actuality, white is grossly underdeveloped, and his king is still stuck in the middle. It's not even close, this position. Actually, white has completely messed up, and he cannot survive here. There are some beautiful variations, but the principal one is white tries to eject the knight, and let's let you look at this for a second, because this is a very nice situation. White's apparently going for some kind of bishop of opposite color situation, but black is first to get on the long diagonal. The answer is queen to c6, and white's early g4 thrust, which constituted the Keres attack, is actually his undoing. His king's in a fatal crossfire. The variations are very nice. Let's take a look. c3, queen c6, rook to safety somewhere, queen check. Now it's all forced. If the king moves somewhere, that would be checkmate. Can't do that. Must guard. Interpose with bishop e3. And now, can white live? No, white cannot live because the king is too compromised. We give another check. And white notices that king d1 is going to be met by queen d3, and the rook on f1 is leaving. So he must play up. And now the unpleasantness continues with bishop c4, complete domination on the light squares. White is lost. He tries one last thing, takes the bishop. Black takes back. White can't continue cannot consider king d1 due to the rook hanging. So he grabs the loose knight, but then you have the self-mate of queen g4. Very ignominious end to the game. Let's back up. That was a nice variation, exploiting white's lack of development and exploiting the weaknesses caused by g4 on move 6. That kind of help loss, it may appear absurd, but when white's in an attacking mode and doesn't care about his own king, that's what might happen. So we had just seen Nispiano play h5. This pleasing two-step of the pawn clarifies the king side. Tukayev has nothing better than to take, and this ruptures this structure, and Nispiano takes this moment to take with the knight, and g6 is occurring soon, and black is very solid. This position could be rated as level chances, but black winds up winning it. Let's quickly take a look. Tukayev develops and prevents black from castling for the time being. Nispiano kicks the knight. Tukayev tries to trade the knights. Nispiano places his knight to a central square. Now he gets rid of the bishop pair, very methodical. And now he's working on the backward h-pawn for white. It's still equal chances, though, because Tukayev hasn't done anything too horrible. He covers f4 with the knight. Nispiano now chooses to kick the bishop to leave white with an isolated pawn. Tukayev retreats. Nispiano expands with f5. Tukayev goes into a defensive formation. And after f4, bishop f2, we have knight f6, rook g1, and then black can just defend the g-pawn with the king. Black is solid. However, white is still compact himself, and the position is still equal chances. Castles, rook c8. I'll just go through the game a little bit so you can get a feel for black's possibilities. Rook g5, rook h6. He's going to be working on that h-pawn later. White safeguards the king. Black safeguards the a-pawn. The position is still approximately equal. Knight a4 going for some squares. Queen c6 getting out of the way of any possible forks on b6. White occupies the hole. Black just moves the rook to safety. White moves the other knight into position. Nothing really is happening here too much. Black finally organizes an attack on the rook. And at this point, white trades a pair of knights and brings the rook back. Black grabs the pawn. Now it looks like black has made a lot of progress, but it's not really true. If white had played the correct move here, which was trade the bishops and then double the rooks, black would find it almost impossible to make progress. The backward pawn, coupled with the sensitive g6 pawn, these two weaknesses are enough to keep black at bay. If Tukayev had played this way, he very likely would have made a draw. However, he maybe in time pressure, he didn't go for the exchange of bishops. He erroneously left the black bishop pair on the board, and that cost him the game. He went over here to b6, which was a blank shot, and after rook c8, he regained the pawn, but he got a completely losing ending in a very instructive manner. This is equal material, but the problem is that white's f-pawn is susceptible to attack by black's rook on h6, and it's actually very easy for Nispiano to make progress. So this regaining material by Tukayev was actually a gross blunder. Let's see how the game concluded. Rook d1. The simple expansion. White really has no counterplay here. Knight e2. Black attacks the pawn, which is the program move. And white just has a very hard time with it here. Rook f1. Black brings all the pieces to the king side. Black methodically trades off white's active piece. And it's very unpleasant. Rook to h3, hitting the f-pawn. White counterattacks the e-pawn, but of course that's easily defended. He uses the king. And let's see, white takes time out to defend. Black defends himself. Black's rerouting, and now he breaks, and the f-pawn is going to become passed. And now the e-pawn is weak. It's just a lot of unpleasantness for white. He doesn't hold this position, doesn't even come close to holding it. White is now in trouble with the attack on the e-pawn. He defends it. Black just improves the king. White moves his rook out, which is kind of a blank shot again. Black attacks it. He moves the rook to safety. Black attacks it again. And now the rook is completely stuck on f5. White attacks the e-pawn, but black can easily defend it. White sees nothing better than to withdraw the bishop to put it on b6 again to guard the knight. Black puts the bishop back on f3. Black reroutes the bishop. Very methodical. The e-pawn is hanging again. Black is taking his time. What he's doing is he's going to get ready for the blow bishop takes e4 at the right moment, and he's going to arrange his pieces in order to play that move. b4, and now black just brings the rook back to g8. White's rook is hopelessly marooned on f5. King b3, and black hits on the right idea now with rook g6. And what black wants to do is he wants to take, and after knight takes, king takes, he has guarded the d6 bishop with his rook. At this point, Tukayev is in total zugzwang and simply resigns due to that bishop e4 threat. If we go back to the beginning to recap, let's take a look at the very beginning. Nispiano combined several ideas in this defense. The first idea was to feint at white with the old school h6 move. And then after bringing Tukayev forward a little bit more, he then declares in the center. This is a very interesting hybrid system. Black does control the dark squares. He donates a fair amount of light squares, but his plan, after knight f5, knight c6, the plan is to eject the knight and then reassert his own control on the white squares. Furthermore, white has no easy follow-up with the pawns. As we saw, if white tried to pawn storm too fast, black gains a vicious counterattack. The viability of the system is proven by the fact that the computer engines unanimously think black is fine in this exact position. He's even in development, and all white has managed to do so far is fling some pawns forward. Black has a solid structure reminiscent of the Sveshnikov Sicilian. He has donated some squares, but he can fight for control of those squares, and he's well on the way to counterplay, as we saw in the game. So I think this is a very interesting system, and I would like all of you to try it out in your own games. I'll set up a blog entry on thechess.com so we can discuss this further. Thank you for your attention. This is International Master Mark Ginsburg, and next time I'll come at you with some other opening system of interest.